Blame it on vanity. This is the end of chapter 12. Church is in, church is out. The old church bells were ringing all the way down the street on a Sunday morning. Little old ladies wore their white frilly hats, waving their paper-laced fans, trying to push the heat out of the place. All our bottoms stuck to the wooden bench, and I believe I heard the preacher man say they were made that way to keep y'all from running out of here. It didn't matter as long as I was far away from home. The handful of nickels that Grandma gave us for an offering was used to buy popsicles and chips at the corner store on our way back to Grandma's house. Church was always my favorite place and the favorite place in the world to be. Chapter 13, The 13th Step. Our family moved to an old broken down red brick house closer to the city. I remember the big move and wanting a new life to begin, but such was not the case. My father stayed the same, and the kids on the block, being more of them, were just as mean. If you were looking for us, most likely we'd be sitting in Patty's bedroom window, staring out into the street, watching and waiting for our father to come home. Outside, the sun was shining brilliantly, and most memorable day, but certainly not a happy one. The leaves were golden brown, and the air smelled sweet from the fallen rain the evening before. Such a contrast from the gloom that decayed those four dark walls that I had been trained to stare into. I sat on the edge of my bed and ran my hands over the welts on my thighs. It felt like my legs would break at the next tremble. I waited all day long and sometimes into the night for Daddy's big dirty truck to appear. The sound of him pulling up to the house always came too soon. I could hear Scott, the old mutt, howling relentlessly at the big black tires as they rolled through the puddle and spit up the mud. His rabid bark echoed and soared like an arrow driven upward, aiming straight through the brick of the house and into my tiny dark room. It pierced a hole like fire in my head. Quickly, I prayed again that death would strike my father down, but death was not moved to touch him. My throat was bone dry, and my hands were shaking and sweaty, soaked with tears. A sudden jolt of fear riveted up my spine when I heard the truck door slam shut. I had to go pee really bad, but I held it in like everything else. I could hear his voice now, and it split the air like lightning and thunder under my ground. It sucked up all the air in my room. Each of his footsteps came down like a sledgehammer as if nailing my head to the floor. I trembled with fear, and I shook. I shut my eyes tightly and screamed inside. Now he's moving through the hallway. I could hear my sisters whispering. His hand reaches for the banister, and his foot hit hard the first step. I can hear a jingling sound, a pocketful of change. Tiny black ants went sneaking across the wooden floor, stumbling underneath my feet, trying to escape my falling tears. I closed my eyes and listened. I saw it all before he even touched me. I loathed him even more knowing there was no place for me to run and no dark closet for me to crawl into and hide. My breath went short as I counted the last creaking 13 steps. His shadow stood there, looming in the doorway, twisting the brightness of the light. My heart leaped up out of my chest when I saw his feet. I knew I had no strength to stand and not a seed of courage left to lift my face to him. My body was paralyzed with fear, but still my heart hoped he wouldn't make me undress. I was terrified of his arms and his capacious hands and of that thick black leather strap that hung down low to his knees. It stared me in the eye as if it had a soul that could hunt me down and forever find its way to me. His anger boiled the sweat upon his face. I knew exactly what he was going to do to my body, and the pain already came way before it came. He sent everybody out of the house that night so he could be alone with me. He dragged my body down the stairs and into the cold, damp storeroom where he kept his tools scattered about. "Stand beside me and don't move," he grunted. He reached for the electric saw and skillfully carved out a very thick paddle of wood with razor-sharp splinters which stuck out like tiny nails on both sides. "Look at this," he said. "I'm going to beat you." My body shook uncontrollably, and I pleaded with him, but his ears were numb to my pleading. His face was rock hard with indignation. I hated him. I wished him dead immediately. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't mean to wear Patty's coat to school." My knees buckled to fall, begging to collapse without me. My feet acted as if they were stuck on a railroad track waiting for a freight train. I prayed that I would die before he began. That's when he made me take off all my clothes, and then he beat me all the way up the stairs and into my room. My body went limp like my rag doll that was lying there on my pillow. When he got tired of using the wood, he unhooked the leather strap that was clipped to the side of his hip. He slashed away at my body, aimlessly whipping me to the floor. Then the leather strap slung around my head and tore into my face. His arms, flaming with muscle, shot up high, and the buckle came down fast, cutting away at my already bleeding skin. Sometimes he'd stop for a moment, take a deep breath, and tell me how I deserved it. His body, filled with rage, seemed reach down into the lower part of hell and raise up a demon with his hand. When I covered up my skin to miss the hits on my back, it only made him more violent. "Don't move," he screamed. His eyes were flaming red as if he were possessed, and his hands swelled up around the leather. After some time went by, he stopped and left the room abruptly. I thought it was all over, but only a few moments later he'd reappear and beat me all over again. This lasted for 2 very long hours, and like a disease festering within me, I grew an even deeper hatred for him. My welts were thick, the blood crusted, and my spirit was broken down dead. I felt like all my little angels were hiding somewhere. A pool of tears fell from Debbie's eyes as she stood over me, staring down at my bloodied body. That night, I cried all the water out of my head. I only thought of death. My first and only prayer was that it would come real soon. Life's not worth living these days, aimlessly wanting for life to erase. I'm just dying here, dying to die, tormented inside my colorless sky. I can't take more pain to my flesh, crawling around on the floor senseless. Why doesn't anyone hear my cries? It won't be long till one of us dies. Johnny Walker Red filled his favorite shot glass, and a Peter Jackson cigarette smoldering to the butt left a dirty yellow stain between his swollen fingers. I watched as he brought the drink to his lips. The brown liquid sliding down his throat was little comfort to the rest he so desperately needed. His mustache glistened wet and his eyes rolled back in his head. He leaned comfortably into his easy chair, pushing the footstool underneath his feet. I can't remember a day I wasn't lugging an empty Labatt's Blue beer bottle boxes down the basement stairwell. He kept them down in the cellar up against the cold cement wall. I remember it being awfully dark down there. I shot out the back door when I finished the task. The sun beat down on my head as I lay in the clover examining the leaves one by one. I was looking for the lucky one that would change my whole life. I looked up to see my sister Debbie standing before me in the bright sunlight. She stretched out her hand with glee, holding a bright shiny quarter, showing it off like a small trophy. "I found some more money, see?" Debbie smiled brightly. This was not good. It didn't take long before Daddy was screaming out his bedroom window, "Get in this house right now." I could have run the 60-yard dash, but I decided otherwise. Patty wasn't moving too fast either, and Debbie should have been right behind, but she disappeared in the opposite direction. Patty and I stood beside one another like tin soldiers awaiting our arrest. "Where's Debbie?" Daddy grunted. "Go find your sister," he yelled. We bolted back out the door, and I was relieved that the screaming wasn't about me. Wow, this was big. No one ever had the nerve to run before. I couldn't help but hope she'd escape him forever. Later that night, we found her all balled up in a corner in some remote area behind the school. She was cold, hungry, and shaking, and her eyes were swelled up with tears. Daddy shone his silver flashlight in her swollen eyes and angrily sent her home. He ran a boiling hot bath and ordered her to sit naked down in the tub. "Watch," he said, threatening, "because this is what you'll get if you ever thinking about running away again." Debbie climbed in, sobbing, as her tears fell down her shaking body. She had stolen the quarter because he had left it there for her, knowing she would steal it, and instead of teaching her not to steal, he tempted her for the chase. Why did he make us watch? He wrapped the strap around one of his fists tightly and began whipping her brutally in the hot, steamy water. Her skin puffed up quickly before our eyes and burned as if she were on fire. All I could do was cry and pull up hatred in my gut for my father. No one ever took her to the hospital to ask why. There was a time when my skull was busted open with a baseball bat from the kid across the street. They just tilted my head over the sink and let the blood leak down the drain. I knew she needed love, and I knew we weren't getting any. Every time her bladder went out of control, my dad would beat her senselessly, and even in the morning when she was fast asleep, he'd drag her out of bed and onto the floor from her mattress. It was an awful sound to awaken to, the shrilling screams, but far worse for my little sister having to feel the belt across her dampened skin. The hatred for him and me intensified, making an immutable knot in my belly whenever he approached me. God, please make him stop. In all the 10 years of being subjected to this ghastly abuse, only one decent neighbor pulled me into their home and asked me questions. I said, "Please don't call the police. My dad will kill me." I left their house feeling like a coward with my head hung low and my tail between my legs. I sought death, and it sought me even harder. All I could do was go outside and kick up some dirt and scream inside. Who could blame a child, innocent at best, never asking more than to eat like all the rest, counting all the minutes for to wait, to run, to hide, hiding low beneath the trees, making up new lives? This is a poem. Somewhere in his head lives a memory of mine. Wonder if he prayed forgiveness thinking of that time. Wonder if he even cried wishing it weren't true, tearing up a child whose weakened body never knew. Stealing something pure and precious, innocent that way, killing off the soul and snatching hearts that long to play.